Welcome again to another episode of the Tech Marketing Podcast. I'm very pleased to be joined by one of my podcast veterans, Mr. Seja, our Head of Innovation and AI. But of course, to be joined on the sofa again by Beth Redpath Katz, Senior Director and Regional Partner Marketing of EMEA at BMC Software. Of course, that's a different role.
Yes.
We had you here last time.
Absolutely.
Hopefully I got that correct.
Yeah, it's a long job title.
It's a long job.
Yeah.
I realised as I was reading it there just how long it was. But last time we had you here talking about the wonderful work you did at VMware.
Yes.
And building out those kind of activated buying groups.
Absolutely.
Now you've been somewhere else trying to do the same.
Very similar, yes.
So what's been your journey since you were last on the Tech Marketing Podcast?
Yeah, sure. So obviously VMware is no longer an entity. We've moved over to Broadcom, and I'm sure my colleagues are having a wonderful time over there. And I moved away from doing the traditional buying group projects with lead management over at VMware. And I moved into a really great company called BMC Software, where, as you said, I look after regional marketing and partner marketing for the field across the EMEA region. So it's very different, and now I'm more of an influencer and a consultant of and user of data within that environment when we are talking about the buying group project. Buying groups are very much still alive, even in companies like BMC, where maybe our data strategy is not as advanced as legacy companies like VMware. But it is a topic that I think a lot of tech companies are talking about. And we are starting to try and develop ways of creating buying groups within our own environments, whatever that might look like.
I don't think there's a month that goes by, Jonathan, where we don't bring up the previous podcast that we recorded. Yeah. Of course, the AI event that we did last year and the data event that we did this year, there's always been so much that gets us really excited. Like, Jonathan, why are you so excited to have Beth back on?
Yeah, I mean, when we did the previous podcast a little over a year ago, I think there were sort of some people in the market talking about activating buying groups and actually being able to measure that and hand it over to sales, but it was still quite a quiet conversation. I think since then, it's really exploded. Lots of people are talking about it, but actually examples of people implementing that are few and far between. So, I think, we have to give Beth credit again for being part of, one of the pioneers of this tech, and actually, and then this kind of way of kind of handing accounts over to sales and actually delivering that. Just super interesting to have you back to sort of dive more deeply into that. And I think, we were just saying before the podcast that this is a new thing for a lot of people. Be really interested to get what's your take on what this is and how marketers should be thinking about it.
Yeah, sure. So I think if we take a step back and look at data in general, obviously most marketers will be used to marketing qualified leads. So a lead that's been scored to a point where we've decided that it's qualified in marketing's terms, with or without telequalification. Take that one step further. I would say a good half of marketers out there are very well versed in marketing qualified accounts. So either a conglomerate of lead scores that then go up to the account, or that would then be seen as an engagement score at the account level, which is then passed over to the sales team or even the qualifiers, maybe BDRs, SDRs, ISRs, who would then say, okay, out of that account, is there something going on? And therefore there would be leads and people and humans to follow up on. I think it's a progression of that, because you've got marketing qualified leads, which are very granular, super narrow. In themselves, they don't really say much about anything. Marketing qualified accounts, whilst a lot more broad, and they do give you an insight into is there activity, it doesn't give you that contextual piece of are the right people doing the right things in that account. And I think this is where whether you call them buying groups, activated buying groups, marketing qualified buying groups, however you want to acronym it, and marketers do love a good acronym. It's the contextualization of understanding that there is a buying group in a form of a hierarchy, so a decision maker, an influencer, a tech user, and a user of sorts, all coming together and actually researching on the same product and engaging with your brand all at the same time to indicate or approximate the fact that they are in a buying cycle. And I think that is something that most marketers understand. They would love to get to. They kind of understand maybe how they potentially could get there, but the orchestration within their marketing tech stack or in their CRM stack is actually quite complex. And I would say it's complex for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because they don't own all of the data, and they don't control all of the tools. And that's really important. As soon as you work in contacts, that's the sales arena. And once you start orchestrating in more of the CRM area to hand over these objects, however which way you want to configure them, you are working within a sales ops environment. And that transition from marketing ops to sales ops is actually quite difficult and hard to penetrate. And that's the arena that we find most marketers in nowadays are saying, oh, buying groups are really cool. How do we do that? And they don't quite know to that last degree.
See, I see the challenge slightly differently, but I think the contextual piece is something I hadn't appreciated. Because I think we're on a journey in marketing at the moment away from MQLs towards something new. And I think that's something new is buying committees or activated buying groups or whatever name we want to call it today. And you're right by adding that context to it, which is we need to understand who the decision maker is versus who's the influencer. I think it's important to understand the relationships between those different orbs, if you think of them. And I think one of the biggest challenges is we don't have a way of, so that's quite a complex problem. Like you've got these different people interacting with each other as part of that buying committee. And we haven't found a way of describing that and understanding it simply. And I think I think you're also spot on. Like the other challenge is that we don't also have a complete picture because we don't own all the data. Like where in your journey at VMware and now at BMC, like how do you get started understanding what that looks like and bringing people along on that journey?
I think it's just very hard. So let's not think that I have some sort of secret sauce into how to orchestrate stakeholders and make them hold hands, because that's just simply not the case. And even at VMware, there was a massive amount of conflict when it came to how we orchestrated this process. I think that the biggest key to all of this is around the structure and the harmonization of the data and understanding relationships, as you've already mentioned, but getting those key stakeholders in a room to understand how that data behaves depending on either a product lens, a vertical lens, or a challenge-based lens, depending on what type of organization you are. And you will end up almost with the most complex looking grid, should we say, of depending on what the account might be buying, there will be a difference or a nuance in the buying group at that account. And just to give you an example, as a regional marketing lead, I will be the buying decision maker about an event. However, when it comes to the marketing automation tool that we use, I am a user. I'm an influencer over tooling that we may well buy for the marketing team because of my position within the marketing organization. And I may well be the technical buyer of a tool like a Demand Base or a Sixth Sense because of the way that my team will use it and my experience. And I've just described how I am a different member of the buying group depending on the product we're buying. And if you have a company that sells all of those things, I am 4 different profiles within one account across those different product sets. And I think that is something that we really need to harness and understand before you actually go and orchestrate this. And I think that's one of the bigger keys.
And I don't think, having we've all seen inside many CRMs. You on the client side, me on the agency side. I'm not sure I've ever seen a CRM be that advanced with how it thinks about different roles and personas and people. Like, that's fundamentally quite a shift to take.
Yeah. I think, yes, it is. I don't think it's so much of a shift that we can't do it. And I think the biggest issue, at least in recent times, I've come up against, it's the way that we view our data. So historically and traditionally, marketing is before the sale and sales is after the sale. And they separated us out into, well, you deal with leads because that's before the sale. And then they transition at some point during the opportunity cycle into a contact, and then sales deals with contacts. And therefore you have the separation between marketing and sales. You also have the difference between marketing ops and sales ops. That barrier needs to be broken. Forward-thinking companies will be starting to break down the idea of MQLs and will be starting to search for something more. They also need to start breaking that mindset of there is a barrier between sales and marketing. Marketing value turns into sales output and vice versa. Sales output then turns into marketing value, and it should be cyclical. Also, companies that have multiple products and services, VMware is an example, BMC is a great example, where you assume the minute you've purchased a product, you are no longer a prospect. But if you have more than one product and complementary products to sell, you then become a prospect. So the whole principle of you marketing, you deal with leads, you sales, you deal with contacts has to be broken. And I think that mentality has to be dissolved. And then you are working in one object and then developing more intelligence around that. Now, does every CRM have the ability to map a job title to a persona, to a member of the buying group hierarchy by product? Maybe. I think it's possible with custom objects, etc. Is it there out of the box right now? No. But I blame the CRMs for their lack of R&D into their own insight around how sales will evolve.
Yep. Yeah. I think you made a point earlier. You said sales leads to marketing value as well. Like, what did you mean by that?
So once a product has been bought, the way that they buy that product, the way they've interacted in the opportunity, the way that the negotiations with legal has gone on, and then the post-sale onboarding, and
it's all data
that
can get used,
this is all data. Remember, think about any form of unstructured data to a marketer is valuable, the way that, or depending on how they can structure it. So all of that unstructured, anecdotal data that you're going to be getting out that customer around how they interact from the time of legal negotiations all the way through to post-sale implementation and even the initiation of consumption is all around the digital journey of the customer, which is all data that marketing can utilize and use and then help understand to increase consumption, understand where there may well be additional challenges within the account to cross-sell. They also might be able to upsell individual elements of that product. So not just about the consumption of the original product. It's like, how do we make sure, and then also increasing the NPS score of the customer, which ultimately is an output of have we done a good job as a company. It's all about that. So I think that when you say that it ends with sales, I think that sales then leads into marketing again.
And I think it becomes, and we were talking about this before the podcast, right? Depending on the type of company you are, like that post-sales journey also becomes really quite vital, right? If you're in a SaaS business, it's all about retention. And actually, when you fall at the bottom, you need to be, that data needs to come back into the top to make sure that you're being marketed to make sure you're happy with the purchase, to make sure you're going to renew again. If you're part of someone like BMC, you're right, it's around upselling. Like, you may have product A, and knowing the data that product B, C, and D could be just as valuable to you, should be fed into those teams. So like, I think we are still looking through some of that data as through a very simplistic lens.
Yeah.
And we need to take that to the next level, really. Like Jonathan, what are you thinking is next?
Well, I'm just thinking this is all fantastic, and that will kind of drive so much value for a business that's able to unlock and utilize that data. But just going back to kind of where we started talking about the fact that it's well documented, and we heard loads of conversations at the first party data event about people acknowledging the fact that MQLs just don't work, and that's not the right way for marketing teams to be sort of measured and to how they should be handing off to sales. I think the challenge is, it's not just about the technology, it's not just about the data, it's about actually this is quite a massive transformational change in an organization. And it requires, as you said, Beth, so many different teams to be aligned on, actually, this is the way that we're going to measure marketing, and this is the way that we're going to kind of have that interaction between sales and marketing and all the other departments that you talked about. How do marketers start that conversation and lead it if there's not a conversation that's already happening? You'd hope that there is in most companies, but if it's not, how do they kind of get that motion started, would you say?
Yeah, such a good question. You'd hope that there was a conversation happening at that top level, but often when regional marketers or a marketer of any kind wants to bring up this transitional change, and it doesn't have to just come from field just because I'm in that role right now, but it can come from anywhere. Often it's because that there is a pipeline gap that sales are feeling, sales are having that pain, and marketing cannot plug that gap through the activities and the output that they're having. So the value that they're giving over to sales is not good enough. And that sparks the conversation of, should we not be trying something different? And should we be not packaging things up differently for sales to deliver value output to them? A great example is this: if you're feeding MQLs, and I could give you an arbitrary figure, say you're feeding them 1,000 MQLs a month, and it's only resulting in maybe one opportunity. The amount of effort that sales has to go through to get to that one piece of gold is too much. So not only are they doing cycles upon cycles to get that one opportunity, they've also not plugging that pipeline gap at the same time. So your sales leaders will start sparking off conversations of marketing isn't doing enough. They're producing the volume, but the value isn't there. Quality over quantity may well be an issue, but you should be able to show it through data. And I guess that brings another whole massive conversation of, if you have your ELT or your SLT awake and aware of how valuable data is and how they view the data, they will know that marketing isn't doing something right by continuing to just deliver MQLs over to the sales organization. And I say that with a caveat. There are certain types of leads that you still will always need to hand over. Hand raisers, so contact us, form fills, etc., free trials, hands-on lab requests, workshop requests, etc., depending on type of organization. You'll always produce those. Those always need to have an SLA, and there will always be a certain high priority lead type that you will always pass through direct to either a telesalesperson or to a salesperson.
Yep.
But for the majority of the rest, that should take up 10% of your volume. The majority of the rest is all just noise, and you're fishing in an ocean to find those pieces of gold.
But what do you think the biggest? Because I completely agree with you, right, which is this whole focus on MQLs at the moment that's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
I think it's unsustainable. Because all you're doing is frustrating all these buyers. Anyone that kind of vaguely looks like they might be putting up their hand to then get chased. Where do you think that challenge is coming from? And how do you start to fix it in an organization?
Well, from experience, it's the fact that we're not really looking at when people are in the buying cycle. We can't predict that buying cycle, and it comes back to predictive marketing. So, ye olde days, we were very much like, well, someone comes through the door, we'll follow up on it. Otherwise, we're just guessing.
Mm-hmm.
We're now in a world where we have a lot of data.
Mm-hmm.
So we shouldn't be guessing. We actually should know. But a lot of marketers still don't know how to use that data in an effective way to understand whether someone is in a buying cycle or not.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes down to, and I blame it on two different things. Firstly, the data skill set of the marketer, and also the data that we're collecting. Is that relevant to actually indicate whether we're in a buying cycle or not?
Okay, yeah.
So you could introduce things like Sixth Sense, demand-based, tech target priority engine, Zoom Info, for instance, to layer over different pieces of data which would indicate yay or nay to, are they in a buying cycle? So are they in market? Are they researching the product or service? Are they interacting with your campaigns? Have they done enough interaction to be engaged? Are they doing that en masse within the account? So can we look across our data set and say, well, at that account, how many people are looking at that? Even if you don't have a buying group and a hierarchy, you can kind of approximate the amount of volume. Is that account therefore high, medium, or low engaged compared to the rest of it? And I think we could get a little bit more intelligent about what we throw across to sales versus what we don't. Even if we don't have a buying group model or some sophisticated piece of information, I think we could do better with the data that we have and how we predict what is and what isn't in a buying cycle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's kind of, if I read kind of what you're saying there, like it's the move from, I'm trying to think of the Gartner terms they have for this, but it's like, okay, you would, the old school way would be someone's interacted with 5 bits of content, therefore they must be scoring highly and putting their hands up. But if those 5 bits of content are some product documentation that's all the way down here, that doesn't mean they're necessarily in a buying cycle.
Exactly.
You've got to look at everything through a customer lens.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So some of the terms we've used, we use MQL a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm going to go out there and say, I think the MQL's days are numbered. I think we all agree here.
Yeah.
You've talked about MQA being the next stage there. And we've got here like the relatively new terminology of AIQL.
Yes.
What is an AIQL?
So, and I can't take credit for this. So within the BMC environment, we have some very, very, very clever and intelligent people who have started to look at more of a dynamic scoring model based on third-party and first-party data to approximate a score of likelihood of being in a buying cycle. So it's an AIQL. So it's a qualified lead based on an AI model, which will approximate based on their interactions and what they're doing in market on third-party and first-party data. Are they in a buying cycle? And it's more like it's a predictor score rather than an actual engagement score.
Buy type of thing.
Yeah, it's like a propensity to buy score. Mm-hmm. It's a guesstimate. Mm-hmm. It's like, how confident are we they are going to be in a buying cycle? So when you pick up the phone, are they going to tell you to go away, or are they going to entertain an initial conversation to find out more about your brand? Mm-hmm. And generally, we go with the idea that over an 80% confidence score is good enough to call. Okay. So we send over a few of those every day, but remembering those scores will change every single day depending on what they have done in the last 28 days, but also what they've done in the last 24 hours, because it could vary from day to day. Mm-hmm. So your score does move up and down. So that's why having a recency of follow-up with the BDRs or your SDRs or your ISRs is really relevant and timely within that instance. Are they as hot as a hand raiser? Absolutely for sure not. But are they better than an old score MQL? Probably. Mm-hmm.
What have you seen in terms of like outcomes improving in terms of AIQLs versus MQL?
Well, at the moment, it's still very early stage, but from what I can see is that we are delivering a lot less volume, but seeing a relatively good return. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's if I deliver 1,000 leads and I get one opportunity out, that's not great. But if I can produce 10 leads and get one opportunity out, that's where I want to be. And that's what we've done with the hand raisers. So hand raisers, the volume of hand raisers are so much smaller than just the generic volume of MQLs. We prioritize them, put a very stringent SLA around them, and actually we get quite good ROI out. And this is what we're trying to find out and hone in on. How do we fine tune those AIQLs so that we're only producing 10 or 15 of them, but we're still getting one opportunity out? So it's a much, much better return.
Yeah, like thinking about the outcomes we were talking about earlier, right? Because we've, in some ways, I want to move away from this MQL towards something like an AIQL.
Yeah.
Right. And actually, one of the outcomes I think we need to be aware of there is, that means you need less salespeople. Because if you were delivering them 1,000 MQLs before, that's 1,000 phone calls that they all need to go through, or 1,000 different interactions or accounts they interview in Salesforce, and you're going down to 10. That's quite a jump. Like, what are the ways that your teams are seeing success, or you're starting to see some difference in the metrics?
So I'm going to go on one of your points first. I don't think it actually changes the amount of sales that you need. I think what happens is that instead of them doing volume follow-up, they're actually focusing much more in delivering a much better customer experience for the opportunities that they do get. There's also a much more collaborative approach between sales and marketing when you deliver less volume but more value, because they actually genuinely value what they give. So then you get much more collaboration back on them inputting into your metrics, them inputting into how you prospect, them inputting into how that lead developed into a pipeline opportunity and close one. You get much more valuable feedback from them and more time with them. So I would say delivering less volume actually delivers much more sales value back. And there isn't less need for sales. It's actually much more customized and personalized and bespoke customer journeys that they can deliver.
Yeah.
And they can therefore hit their target more easily. And for me, that makes happy salespeople, and happy salespeople make happy marketing people.
And I think that comes into another really important point that we've talked about before when you're on the podcast, which is that personalized experience, that customer experience. Again, looking through a customer lens.
Yeah.
Like, how can marketing help sales achieve that? Like, what's our role, and how is that changing?
Oh, it's a massive role. And actually, this is part of the reason why I'm in London for the next couple of days, actually, to talk with some of the web team and the customer success teams around their projects around digital go-to customer. And this was off the back of, and we mentioned earlier on when we were talking about it, there's a Gartner paper that mentioned that by 2025, 80% of the buying cycle will be on a digital platform. And that's not just in the tech industry, that's just a broad brush statement.
I mean, we've been seeing it go that way for a while.
Exactly. So all of a sudden, BMC and lots of other companies are waking up to the idea that we're having to interact with people before the sale and also during the sale and post-sale on a more digital platform, but also how we exchange that value back to them for the data they give. So customers are starting to wake up to the fact that the data they hold about themselves has a value. And they will give that to you if you will deliver value back to them. So a couple of statements I made in a recent presentation to some of my sales colleagues was, if a person is more likely to buy from you by up to 3x times if you can make a personal, emotional connection with them and deliver them a great experience. And they're like, hold up. You just talked about digital and then an emotional connection. I said, yes. A brand needs to create an emotional connection with someone on a digital platform to encourage them to buy.
So how do you go about doing that? Like,
through hyper-personalization. It makes people feel like you care. It makes them feel like you are taking notice of the information that you're giving them. You're weighting that information in terms of the value that it has, and then you're delivering back a hyper-personalized experience that means something to them. And I think that is something that brands are starting to wake up to. BMC has absolutely woken up to that. And I think that people will start understanding how that hyper-personalization means something. So that goes back down to, do I want less salespeople? Absolutely not. I don't want less salespeople. I want as many, if not more, salespeople within my organization. But I want them delivering a hyper-personalized, digital-first experience for all of their customers with human element. We're not saying no human element. And when we talk about AI, I think human-led, AI-enabled is absolutely the way to go. I think digital-first, human-enabled is absolutely the way to go for the customer experience.
But to tie a few of these threads together.
Yeah, go for it.
Because I think it might have been one of our previous podcast guests for this year. We brought up the argument that we think B2B marketing is more emotional than B2C. Like B2C is a very transactional element. A lot of people normally disagree with me on that point, but B2C is very transactional. B2B, you're putting your job on the line. You're putting the kudos that you've built up inside a company to say, I want to buy this solution. These are the reasons why.
Yeah.
So I think we agree it is more emotional. But just to tie that into to what you just said, like it is, that means there's so much going on here in my head. Like from a sales perspective, that means we need to take advantage of some of the modern technology like personalization, but also things like live chat in order to still make sure that we are building that human connection.
Totally.
But being cognizant of the fact that the modern buyer doesn't want to necessarily spend time on the phone or in meetings.
Absolutely.
Like, that's a real challenge. Like tying those two things together is difficult.
I agree. And
it's high stakes as well, right? Because if you get the personalization wrong, you can have the opposite effect. So you need to make sure that you get it spot on.
Totally. And I think there is I think sales is also going to be going through an even harder transition over the next decade.
I think we talked about this last time, and I'm gonna say it again. Like I think this change, that 80% stat, means it's now time for marketing to take the lead, not sales.
Oh,
but that's
100%.
contentious.
It is contentious, but I think there's also we're dealing with the digitalization of the customer journey, but we're also dealing with the shift of the decision maker. So the shift from the baby boomer to the Gen X was subtle. Because in principle...
Was it subtle?
I think so. I'm not gonna say, I think coming from a millennial, it was subtle. But the millennials to the Gen Alphas. You're not telling me that that's not going to be a major shift. I mean, we're still trying to work out as a millennial which height of my socks I need to have to be able to be cool. Alphas they don't even look at my socks. They are online, they're impersonal, they are brand agnostic, they are totally as a service. They are a whole different world away. They never grew up in an environment where there wasn't part of their life that was on social media.
Yes.
Whereas we're the decision makers of today, I mean, the millennials, maybe some of the Gen X's, we grew up in an offline world. Our childhoods weren't on social. We are not digital first from a childhood perspective. Climbing trees was not completely out of the question. Whereas the alphas, they were handed an iPad by their parents at the age of 6 months, 18 months, 2 years old. They have never known an environment where they weren't watched, they weren't catalogued, they weren't in an online environment. And I think that shift, And unfortunately, my generation did that to them.
Yeah.
Because we are the parents of the Gen Alphas. And I think that sales, unfortunately, so going back on topic, sales will have a harder transition as the millennials move out of the decision maker and more into the consultative board members. The speed, the Moore's Law's effect of how quickly these alphas are going to become decision makers are going to make heads spin.
I don't disagree, but I think we're going to have an even more rockier ride than what you're forecasting there. I mean, even if we reflect back on all of our careers, this meeting 10, 15 years ago, I would have been in a full suit, probably with a tie, right? Like, that's just the way it was. Like, you turned up to meetings in then we moved away from having a tie. I mean, I'm probably still overdressed even for this. Most business meetings now where you might be making £1 million worth of discussions, most people are in trainers and t-shirts, and it's just going that way. And I think if we look at what I think is going to make it rockier, though, is that Gen Alpha, as they come into the workforce, it's not going to be the same procession of generations that we've seen, because AI is shaking that up as well.
Totally. Right, so, but they're already AI enabled. They're already using ChatGPT to help them research their homework. Yeah. They learn how to.
By the way, I don't think the education system has caught up with that either. So that's a whole other podcast.
No, I agree. But they learn everything through YouTube. They don't ask their parents, how do I go to do this or to do that? They just come up and, I've just done this. How did you do that? Well, I learned it through TikTok, Snapchat, YouTube. My friends told me, they Googled it. They have this overwhelming independence that I've never seen or experienced before in any other environment. And so the ability to have reliance on your colleagues and collaboration, that instinctive basis of how you learn, is completely different for that generation.
Which is going to shake up the buyer group even more.
Oh, totally.
Because we're going to go from being, goodness, right, if you extrapolate that out further, we might go from having stronger relationships as part of the buyer group to having weaker ones.
Totally.
And even towards kind of where the buy decision maker may feel more, it may be more of a hero and villain approach that they're taking to things, where they want to be seen as the hero that comes in and brings in and saves the day for everyone. I don't know, like we're theorizing here.
Oh, totally.
What we're definitely saying is there's going to be a change.
Oh, 100%. I think that there will be a change. I mean, go back 10 years ago, ABM, we all talked about the decision maker and their sphere of influence, and understanding the sphere of influence based on who their direct hires are. You could tell a personality type based on who the last 3 hires were, because they're often filling the gaps of maybe the skill sets that they don't have as they come into a role. And the people around them in their wider circles will also tell you more about how their personality and how they interact and develop connections with people. Fast forward, we're talking about buying groups and how those interactions would shape how someone would make a decision. And primarily those people have met face to face. I think the shift that you're talking about is in 10 years' time, that buying group will have made a connection purely on a digital channel, and they won't have met face to face.
And I think how people collaborate is going to be a key part of that. That's
If you get this right, so we've talked about MQLs, we've agreed that those are out the window. We've talked about the fact that MQAs is kind of the next level, and actually at BMC you're looking at AIQLs as a kind of, I think at the event you were saying the AIQL is a kind of halfway point between MQLs and the kind of promised land of activated buying groups.
Yeah, totally.
If you get this right and you kind of get to those activated buying groups, like what does that mean? Like what did you see at VMware that's kind of given you the conviction that, we did it, we achieved our result, and actually we started to see some outcomes from getting to that promised land? Like, what were the sort of key things that you saw from that?
Put quite simply, it's the, if you give a buying group over, it's the propensity to buy, it just increases. So if a buying group is delivered in the right way, a timely, product specific, and everyone's activated with it, there is, right, I wouldn't say twice as likely, but it's near twice as likely for them to close win than to close lose. So if you could say to someone, okay, well, we currently have a close rate of 50-50, but if you follow up on these 5 leads rather than those ones that we don't really know anything about, but these 5 activated buying groups, you have got twice as likely to win them than anything else in the world. That's a very compelling reason.
Absolutely.
So even if, and in my industry, 25 to 35% is fairly normal in terms of closed win based on opportunity ratios. If you could double that by doing absolutely nothing, so the sales staff has to do nothing more than just follow up in exactly the same number of leads, maybe even slightly less, in the form of an activated buying group, but they've got a likelihood of twice as many times to win that deal than to lose it. It's a very compelling reason for sales to pay more attention to it. B, give us more information along the way, and then the results speak for themselves. So effectively, it's money. Most reasons why you would do anything is because you're going to create more money or earn more money or create more pipeline to give business outcomes, and that's basically why you would do a business buying group.
I mean, the story you just told, I think, is exactly what we need to be headed for. I'm going to be quite contentious and say, I think marketing, as you were describing doubling that close rate, I was just sat there adding up the bonus figures for the sales guys closing it and thinking, hey, in marketing, I want a piece of that pie. Isn't it about time we got some of the recognition for that?
That's a contentious question. I think it's the marketers that understand how to orchestrate that buying group, understand the data on why that buying group is a buying group, and the propensity of that buying group to buy and not to buy will reap the rewards of being the next CMO.
Yeah, but I'd still come back to I think there's a gap in how marketing is recognised as part of that journey.
I agree. I know, but I think that's a big mindset shift for marketing to feel like they are responsible for the overarching pipeline and close one revenue. And this then comes into that maybe wider conversation of is marketing more of a revenue rev ops sort of model? Should it be going into a model where our goals and our aims and objectives are solely based on closed one revenue? And therefore, should we be more geared to revenue marketing rather than just purely tactical marketing that generates activity and awareness? And then you will end up having a separation of marketing where you deal with maybe more of the brand awareness and air cover on one side, the maybe slightly softer areas of marketing. And then you'll have more of the harder data-driven areas of marketing that deals with the buying groups and deals with effectively pipeline generation.
One of my previous podcast guests likes to refer that as in-market demand gen and out-of-market demand gen, the softer parts. But that's a whole other conversation as well. We need to get to a point where we're wrapping up here and providing some useful advice to our listeners. So, firstly, we've theorized a lot about how generation is going to come in and change this. We've talked a lot about the future of MQLs. What's next? What's next on your agenda to approach at BMC?
For me, it's hyper-personalization at scale.
What does hyper-personalization mean to you?
So it's being able to take human-generated content that is standard and generic, and then being able to hyper-personalize it to that human, to that organization, to that vertical, or to that go-to-market product area at scale within an AI-enabled environment, so that we can deliver effectively one-on-one to one-to-few programs at scale, which goes into more of an ABM type of model, but then ABM type models really go with and are hand in hand with buying group models. So that would be my next piece. And I think an expansion on the digital go-to. I think it's a go-to customer, prospect, and partner. And I think that digital model needs to be expanded upon.
I mean, that very aligned with how we're thinking about stuff as well. And I'd love to pick your brains on that on a future podcast. But to give our listeners one more closing thought, if someone's listening to this thinking, hey, I need to get on board with it, like what's the first step to getting started with something like an AIQL?
Look at your data. Genuinely look at your data, be happy with the data you have, and then think about how you could build onto it and monetize what you've got. And then look at the data sources that you might need to add in to add contextual pieces to that data to drive value out of it. That's where you would start.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Beth. It's been a pleasure to have you back on the Tech Marketing Podcast. And Jonathan, of course, to have you joining me on the sofa.
Pleasure to be
and I'm sure we'll have you back again soon.
Yes, thank you.